Hey y'all, this is Miss Welch. Today we are going to discuss homeostasis. Now, homeostasis is probably the most important topic to understand in all of anatomy and physiology, in all of biology, and all of life, because homeostasis is how we stay normal. It is the way our bodies regulate our internal conditions regardless of the external conditions or anything else going on. Without homeostasis, anything else is disease or disorder. So we're going to talk about four things. We're going to start with just defining what homeostasis is. We're going to look at a homeostatic mechanism and how that works in a complete cycle. And then we're also going to look at negative and positive feedback, two different types of homeostatic mechanisms. So let's get started. All right, if you went to dictionary.com or any other dictionary and looked up the definition of homeostasis, you might see a definition like this one. It says the tendency of a system, especially physiology, right, of an animal or a person, to maintain internal stability. So we're trying to maintain a constant internal state. Our body survives best within a certain range for every different characteristic. So think about everything your body has to monitor. Respirations, blood pressure, heart rate, blood sugar, oxygenation, everything that your body needs to survive needs to be within a certain range. Now, first of all, these things are not pinpointed to one specific value. So we do talk about ranges. We call this the set point, but it's not really one point. It's a range of points. You know, your respirations are not always 16 respirations per minute. Your heart rate is not always 83 beats per minute. You know, there's a range where you can survive, a range that fits best for your specific body. And of course, that even changes based on species or individuals. So that internal condition, though, your body knows what that range is and tries to maintain the balance in that range. Let's look at a homeostatic mechanism. Let's look at this one on the left. It's just a generic version, and then we'll get into more specifics. Now, a homeostatic mechanism just means that entire cycle from start to finish of how the body measures and determines that something has changed and then does something about it, getting it back into those correct internal conditions to maintain homeostasis. So at the very beginning, there has to be a stimulus. Something has changed. That might be in the internal environment or in the external environment, but something has changed for the body. Now, to know that it has changed, that has to be measured. That has to be detected. So that's where the sensor comes in. We also say a receptor right here. So either word is fine in this box, depending on what book you're looking at. A sensor or receptor measures. That's its primary function, to measure the value of whatever it is that we are currently looking at. Now here at the control or the control center, that is what is interpreting that measurement. So the sensor or receptor, that's always a nerve cell, sending it to a control center. Depending on the feature, that may change a little bit, but the control center then evaluates. So it takes that measurement, evaluates if it is normal range or if it is outside of the set point, the value that it should be. And the control center then, after interpreting that, decides on an action. What does the body need to do? Now, sometimes that action may be nothing. It may be that we are perfectly in balance. If not, then the control center is going to send a message to an effector. And the effector is where the effect comes from. The effector is the working part of this system that is going to make a change in the body somewhere to bring us back into balance. This is almost always in our bodies a muscle or a gland. Those are things that can secrete hormones or move muscles, make actions for something to happen. And then how does this become a loop or a cycle? Well, then the receptor has to measure it again. We have to see if what we did made a difference. And that's where this loop comes in, where we circle back around and we check. The receptor measures, did we change enough that we are now in balance, or do we need to make another tweak? So let's look at that in a real example over here in the body. So body temperature. Our temperature is a homeostatic process. We have to keep our temperature in that set point range. 37 degrees Celsius is around that 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit that we all have heard is normal body temperature. You know that newer research shows that that is lower. It's our body temperature normal average is actually lower than that. So you might look that up if you're interested. If the body temperature exceeds the normal, so let's say that you are sick with a fever or you are hot and sweating outside, then the receptors, nerve cells in your skin, right, will measure that temperature and they will send that message. Those thermoreceptors will send a message to your brain. That is your control center, the temperature regulatory center in the brain. That's actually in your hypothalamus. And that part of the brain will measure and compare your temperature to the set point. So if your set point is 98.6, the brain will compare the message from the receptors. And if your receptors say we're 99.7, then the body, the brain will know that that is out of sync with the set point, and it will go to the effectors. And the effectors are sweat glands. And those sweat glands can then secrete sweat, secrete perspiration, which then will cool you down. And the body then will just go back to the beginning and the receptors will measure, did that help enough? Are you still too hot or did you cool off? And the brain will regulate whether you keep sweating or if you stop sweating based on that receptors information. So this homeostatic mechanism goes around and around a circle all the time. And sometimes the effectors work and sometimes they don't. It depends on whether the brain tells them that they need to do a job to change your parameters or if you are in balance. Let's discuss the difference between negative and positive feedback. Now, negative feedback does not mean negative in a bad way. It's just talking about directionality of the values in the cycle. So let me tell you a little story. Maybe it'll make it make sense. So look at this picture. I do not live here, but I totally would. My kids laugh at me because my ultimate dream home would be a hobbit hole. So if I lived here in one of these little hobbit holes, then this would be my home. And no matter where I went, if I went to work, I would come back home at the end of the day. If I went to school, if I went to church, if I went to the grocery store, no matter where I went, the end of the day, home would be calling and I would return home. That's my set point. That's where I normally want to be. Now that is negative feedback. No matter how far away a value goes for your body. So let's just take heart rate, for example. So if you are exercising and you increase your heart rate and you get away from normal, your body's going to bring you back to that set point. If your normal is 70 beats per minute and you get up to 100, 120 because you're exercising, when you calm down, you stop exercising, your body will slowly bring you back to your 70. It will bring you home. If you're super resting and you're sleeping, your heart rate drops right as you're sleeping. You get down to 60. When you wake up, your body's going to bring you back to 70 to that resting heart rate that is your normal set point. That's negative feedback. It doesn't matter which direction you go, whether I go to the store, whether I go to work. It's always going to bring me back to the set point. That is negative feedback. It's a return to normal conditions. All right, now what if instead I'm at work one day and instead of going home at the end of the day, I get in the car and I say, you know what, I've had a rough day, I need a vacation, I'm just going to go to the beach. I'm driving to Florida. I'm going to see the ocean before I go home. And so I get in the car and instead of turning toward home, I turn the other direction and I start going to Florida. And every time I stop at a gas station and I have to fill that tank back up, I think about it as I'm pumping gas. I think, you know, should I? And I say, yes, I'm just going to keep going. Every stop fuels me to go farther and farther and farther away from home. So eventually, like this lady in the picture, I get to the beach, I put my toes in the sand, I enjoy sunset at the beach, and then finally, once I have completed my mission, I turn around and I go home. This is positive feedback. Positive feedback does not bring us straight back to normal conditions. Positive feedback brings us to an event. that is not normal. So our body has to rev up each time that it measures the conditions. It revs up to go farther toward completing an event. And then when the event is completed, we return back home to our normal conditions. Now, there are only a few examples of this in the body. Two of the best. The first one is childbirth. So there's an event at the end, right? We want to have the baby. So the hormones that are secreted, like oxytocin, will make a bigger contraction. And that contraction stimulates you to release more oxytocin. And more oxytocin causes a bigger contraction. So each step fuels the next one to get bigger and bigger and bigger until, ta-da, we have an event, we have a baby. Now, when that's done, then all those levels will decrease and we'll go back to our normal conditions of not having a baby. The other good example is blood clotting. When you have a cut and you start clotting and you make clotting factors, those clotting factors will start making a clot, and that will encourage more clotting factors to be made so that you have more clotting, and more clotting factors are made so you have more clotting until finally that injury is clotted up so that you can heal and make a scab. If it was the other way and every time you saw a little clotting you went, oops, we're not supposed to have clotting, we'll go back to normal, you just keep bleeding all the time. We have to get to the event, we have to make the clot, and then we'll go back to normal conditions of not having clotting factors so that you won't have thick blood and you can live and have your normal viscosity of blood going through the body. So those are the two most common examples. Now, a lot of things in our body have bits and pieces, some little bits of negative, some little bits of positive. Our body is very complex, but as a whole, positive feedback is much more rare. Everything else would have been negative feedback. You would have gone home. So that would be like everything you measure, vital signs at the doctor's office, right? Your blood pressure, your heart rate, your temperature, your breathing, your sugar, your oxygen, your hormone levels, all those things that we usually measure at the doctor's office, most of those are negative feedback because we're trying to keep within a set range of features. All right, that's all for our discussion on homeostasis today. Be sure to read more in your textbook or online and make sure that you completely understand the topic. And thanks for watching.